There are gifts that bring joy, and then there are gifts that reveal the darkest parts of the human soul. It is Christmas, a season meant for mercy, warmth, and family. Candles are lit, laughter fills grand halls, and somewhere behind silk curtains and polished smiles, a man of power receives a present that no human being should ever be, a living person, wrapped not in ribbon, but in silence, not offered with love, but with ownership. Tonight, you are going to hear a story that forces one hard question into the open. How can cruelty survive inside the same bloodline as love? How can a family bond be broken so completely that one sibling becomes the property of another? The man at the center of this story was a baron, wealthy, respected, untouchable, a product of a world where power erased consequences, and the woman given to him as a Christmas gift was enslaved, stripped of her name, stripped of her past, stripped of her freedom. What no one in that room realized at first is what makes this story unbearable to hear. She was not a stranger. She was not an outsider. She was his own sister. This video is not just about a shocking moment in history. It is about how systems of power can erase humanity, how traditions can hide violence, and how silence allows cruelty to pass as normal. You will learn how family ties were destroyed by greed, how social status protected monsters, and how a celebration of goodwill became a scene of moral collapse. This story matters because it forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Evil does not always arrive with chaos and screams. Sometimes it comes quietly, dressed in tradition, applauded by society, passed from hand to hand like a gift. As this story unfolds, you will see how a sister was lost to a system that valued ownership over blood, how a brother was shaped by privilege until empathy disappeared, and how a single moment revealed the true cost of unchecked power. Stay with this video until the end, because this is not only about what happened then, it is about what happens whenever people stop seeing others as human. It is about how easily morality bends when wealth and status take control, and it is about remembering the voices history tried to silence. This is a story of family turned into property, of Christmas turned into cruelty, and of a truth so disturbing it was meant to stay hidden. But today it will be heard. Before we talk about the gift itself, we must understand the man who received it. The baron did not live like ordinary people. He existed above them. His name opened doors before he even arrived. His presence demanded silence. In his world, authority was not questioned. It was inherited, reinforced and protected by tradition. The baron's wealth was not just measured in gold or land, it was measured in influence. His estate stretched across villages and fields where hundreds lived under his rule. Crops grown on his land fed his table. Taxes collected from struggling families funded his comfort. Every stone in his mansion stood as proof that he belonged to a class untouched by consequence. People bowed when he passed, not always out of respect, but out of fear. The law did not apply to him in the same way it applied to others. Courts listened differently when his name was spoken. Accusations softened. Complaints disappeared. Power wrapped around him like armor, thick and impenetrable. His authority reached into every corner of life. He decided who worked, who ate, and who suffered quietly. For the poor, survival often depended on his mood. For the ambitious, favor from the baron could change a lifetime. For everyone else, staying invisible was the safest choice. Socially, he stood at the center of elite circles. He attended lavish gatherings where deals were sealed with handshakes and laughter. He dined with men who shaped policy and controlled trade. In those rooms, morality bent easily. What mattered was loyalty, silence, and shared benefit. From childhood, the baron was taught that he was different, better, more deserving. His education did not include empathy for those beneath him. It focused on entitlement, on preservation of status, on maintaining control. Over time, this belief hardened. It became natural to him. With power came protection. Servants did not speak. Neighbors did not intervene. Authorities looked away. Even the church, meant to stand for moral order, often remained silent in the presence of his donations and influence. The baron learned an unspoken lesson. He could act and nothing would happen. This sense of untouchability shaped his behavior. Compassion became optional. Accountability disappeared. Other people's pain registered only as background noise. When humans are surrounded by obedience long enough, they begin to see it as proof of superiority. In such a world, the line between ownership and humanity faded. People became assets. Lives became commodities. And when someone like the Baron received a human being as a gift, it did not shock him. It fit the logic of his existence. Power had already taught him that everything and everyone could belong to him. Christmas was meant to be a season of warmth, a time when candles were lit to push back the darkness of winter. Bells rang through towns and villages, reminding people of mercy, forgiveness, and hope. Even the poorest homes tried to mark the day with something special, a shared meal, a prayer, or a quiet moment of gratitude. In the Baron's household, Christmas was grand. The halls were decorated with rich fabrics and polished ornaments. Tables overflowed with food brought in from distant lands. Music echoed through rooms large enough to swallow the voices of ordinary people. From the outside it looked like the perfect image of celebration and abundance. Guests arrived dressed in fine clothing, carrying smiles that matched the occasion. Laughter filled the air, glasses were raised in endless toasts, conversations drifted easily between pleasure and pride. It was a display of generosity, or at least the appearance of it. Wealth made celebration effortless, yet beneath the surface something was deeply wrong. Behind the closed doors, away from the warmth of candlelight, the meaning of Christmas began to twist. The same hands that exchanged gifts and offered blessings were connected to suffering that no one acknowledged. The celebration demanded silence about where comfort truly came from. In the servants' quarters, the season felt different. Joy was muted, smiles were cautious. For those who worked within the walls, Christmas did not bring rest. It brought longer hours and sharper expectations. The contrast was painful. Light above, shadows below. The Baron moved through the festivities with ease. He accepted praise and admiration as if they were owed. Christmas for him was not about humility or reflection. It was about display, about reinforcing his place at the top, about reminding everyone who held power. This is how darkness hides, not in chaos but in ritual, not in open violence but in tradition. When cruelty becomes normal, it blends into celebration. It sits quietly beside music and laughter, unnoticed by those who benefit from it. Outside the mansion walls, the world endured winter. Hunger lingered, hardship continued. But inside, excess drowned out any thought of suffering beyond the gates. The joy was contained, selective and guarded. Christmas is supposed to remind people of shared humanity, of kindness extended beyond comfort. But in places of extreme power, its meaning can be hollowed out. What remains is a performance, a ritual stripped of conscience. That is what made this moment so unsettling. While hymns played and candles burned, something deeply immoral waited to be revealed. A gift that had nothing to do with generosity. A secret that exposed how easily joy can coexist with cruelty when no one dares to look too closely. The moment came quietly, without drama or hesitation. Among the finely wrapped boxes and carefully chosen offerings, one gift stood apart. It did not sparkle. It did not shine. It did not rest on a table. It stood still, silent, breathing. The Baron received an enslaved woman as a Christmas present. No one gasped. No one protested. The room did not freeze in horror. Instead, the exchange was treated as normal, as acceptable, as if a human life carried the same value as silverware or land. In that world, this kind of gift was not unheard of. It was simply spoken of less openly. She was presented without ceremony. No name was announced, no past acknowledged. She was reduced to a function, a possession transferred from one owner to another. The language used was cold and deliberate. She was described in terms of usefulness, obedience and worth, not as a person, but as an asset. This was a society where power decided humanity, where status determined who mattered and who did not. Those at the top created rules that protected themselves and erased others. Enslaved people existed outside moral consideration. They were counted, traded, and inherited. Ownership was written into law, custom, and everyday speech. Contracts listed people alongside livestock. Records measured their value in numbers. Birthdays were replaced with prices. Families were separated without consequence. Pain was invisible to those who benefited from the system. The Baron did not question the gift. He had been raised in a world that taught him this was normal. From childhood, he watched others command lives with a word. He learned that authority meant entitlement, that possession was proof of power. For the enslaved woman, this moment marked another loss, another transfer, another reminder that her fate was decided without her voice. She stood in a room filled with celebration, yet she was excluded from its meaning. Christmas passed through her like cold air. Those present understood the unspoken rule. Do not look too closely. Do not ask questions. To acknowledge her humanity would force them to confront their own complicity. Silence was easier. Comfort depended on it. This is how such systems survive, not through constant violence but through acceptance, through rituals that disguise injustice as tradition, through moments where cruelty is wrapped in politeness and passed along with a smile. The gift revealed the truth of that world, that freedom was reserved for the powerful, that dignity could be bought and sold, and that a human being could be reduced to an object even on a day meant to celebrate compassion. She stood there without resistance, not because she agreed, but because resistance had long been trained out of her. Her body showed the signs of a life lived under command. Her posture was careful. Her movements were restrained. Every gesture carried caution, as if even breathing too freely might invite punishment. Her clothing was plain, chosen for function, not dignity. It marked her status before she ever spoke. If she still remembered what it felt like to wear something of her own choosing, she did not show it. The room was warm, filled with voices and light, yet she seemed untouched by it, as though standing in a colder place entirely. Fear lived in her eyes, not the kind that flares and fades, but the kind that settles in and becomes familiar. It was the fear of unpredictability, of sudden orders, of being moved, sold, or punished without warning. She had learned that safety was temporary and always borrowed. She did not speak because she had learned the cost of speaking. Silence had become her shield. Words could be misunderstood. Words could be twisted. Words could invite anger. So she kept them inside, locked away with memories she was never asked to share. Her hands remained still, not clasped in prayer, not folded in comfort, simply waiting, waiting for instructions, waiting for judgment, waiting for whatever came next. Her fate was never something she negotiated. It was assigned. In that world she had no future she could plan, no path she could choose. Even her body was not fully her own. Decisions about where she lived, what she did, and who controlled her were made by others. She existed in a constant state of uncertainty. The celebration around her felt distant, almost unreal. Laughter passed by her like noise through a wall. She was present yet unseen, a human shape without acknowledgement. A life paused while others enjoyed the moment. She had likely learned to read rooms quickly, to sense danger in tone and posture, to understand when to disappear into stillness. Survival depended on observation, not expression. There was no visible anger on her face, no tears, not because she felt nothing, but because she had learned that emotion offered no protection. Hope was risky, expectation invited disappointment, so she remained blank, controlled, contained. Her silence was not emptiness, it was filled with endurance, with memories she carried alone, with an understanding that her fate once again had been decided without her consent. At first nothing about her suggested familiarity. She appeared like so many others who had passed through powerful households, nameless, unnoticed, easily forgotten. Yet as time moved forward, small details began to surface, quiet inconsistencies, subtle signs that hinted she did not come from nowhere. Her accent, faint but unmistakable, carried traces of a region tied closely to the Baron's own lands. It was not the speech of someone raised entirely in servitude. Certain words slipped out differently, shaped by early years spent in a different world. Those who listened closely might have sensed it, but few ever did. There were moments when she paused at familiar corridors, as if something tugged at her memory. A doorway, a window, a scent carried through the halls. These reactions were brief, quickly suppressed, but they revealed fragments of a past she could not fully reach. Her knowledge stood out in small ways. She recognized customs before they were explained. She understood manners that enslaved people were rarely taught. When prayers were spoken, her lips moved with quiet certainty, as though the words had once been part of a shared family ritual. Even her features told a story. The shape of her eyes, the curve of her jaw, they echoed traits long present in the household, resemblances that might have raised questions if anyone had cared to look beyond status and labels. She carried memories that did not belong to a life of bondage, faded images of warmth, of voices calling her by a name she no longer used. of a home that vanished before she understood why. Those memories surfaced at night, when silence made room for the past. Her separation had happened early, too early to fight, too early to understand. One moment she had belonged somewhere, the next she was gone, lost to circumstances shaped by greed, conflict, and indifference. Family ties were severed without ceremony. The longer she remained in the Baron's presence, the heavier the unspoken connection became. Something passed between them that neither fully acknowledged, a hesitation, a pause, a sense of recognition buried under years of distance and power. She did not speak of it, not because she lacked memory, but because she lacked permission. In her world, truth was dangerous. Claiming a past could invite punishment. Claiming family could be seen as defiance. So the clues remained scattered, half seen, half felt, a shared history waiting to be recognized, a bond hidden beneath layers of silence, authority, and fear. The truth did not arrive in a single moment. It emerged slowly, like a shadow taking shape. Pieces that once seemed unrelated began to align. The accent, the memories, the familiar features. What had been ignored could no longer be dismissed. She was not a stranger. She was the Baron's own sister. The realization carried a weight that words could barely hold. Two lives that began under the same roof had been pushed onto opposite paths by forces neither chose. One was raised in comfort and authority. The other was taken, sold, and erased. Blood did not protect her. It was overridden by power. Their separation had happened when they were young, in a time of upheaval, when inheritance and property mattered more than kinship. Decisions were made by elders, brokers, and men who spoke in contracts, not compassion. A child was removed and the family moved on. Greed played its role quietly. Wealth demanded expansion. Alliances required sacrifice. Unwanted burdens were discarded. In such calculations, a child could become expendable, especially one who complicated inheritance, reputation, or control. As years passed, memory faded for one sibling and sharpened into survival for the other. The Baron grew into his title, surrounded by affirmation and obedience. He learned to see the world through ownership. People were resources. Relationships were transactions. For his sister, identity became dangerous. She learned to survive by letting go of who she once was. Family became a memory too fragile to claim. Every reminder of her past was buried to avoid punishment. Power completed the erasure. When one person holds absolute authority, truth bends. Even blood loses its meaning. The Baron's position placed him above emotional consequence. He was not required to remember. He was not forced to feel. The system around him supported this separation. Laws protected property rights, not family bonds. Society rewarded dominance and silence. No one intervened. No one questioned how siblings could become master and slave. What remained was a cruel imbalance. One sibling defined by privilege, the other by captivity. The bond between them existed only in fragments, scattered across memory and regret. This is how families are broken without violence, through decisions made in comfort, through systems that value control over connection, through power that convinces people they are exempt from responsibility. By the time the truth surfaced, it stood against years of conditioning, against a world that had taught one to command and the other to obey. Blood recognized blood, but power had already rewritten what that recognition meant. It began when she was still a child, too young to understand the meaning of loss or the weight of decisions made over her life. One day the world she knew simply disappeared. Familiar voices faded, warmth turned into distance. She was taken quietly, without ceremony, as if removing an object from a room. There was no explanation given to her. Children were not owed reasons. Hands guided her away, and she learned quickly that questions brought no answers. What she carried with her were fragments. A face, a name spoken once and never again, the memory of belonging that would later feel unreal. She was moved through places that did not care where she came from. Her story was reduced to silence. Documents replaced identity. Her worth was assessed, not her well-being. She was passed along as something transferable, something that could be owned. The sale was not dramatic. It rarely was. There were no cries that mattered to those involved. Transactions happened calmly, efficiently. A child changed hands. Coin exchanged. Records updated. Life continued for everyone else. With each transfer she learned to disappear a little more. To survive she let go of the past piece by piece. Names were forgotten on purpose. Memories were hidden where no one could reach them. Hope became something she could not afford. As years passed she was absorbed into a system designed to erase. Enslavement did not rely only on chains. It relied on repetition, on obedience taught daily, on reminding someone that resistance was pointless. While she was being broken into compliance, her brother was being shaped by privilege. He was educated, protected and prepared for power. The same system that stripped her of freedom reinforced his authority. One life was reduced, the other elevated. Laws ensured that his inheritance remained intact. Customs ensured his dominance went unchallenged. No one connected the loss of a child to the rise of a baron. The separation was convenient. It solved problems for those in control. She was forgotten not because she lacked value, but because remembering her served no purpose. Silence was useful. Absence simplified things. The system did not reward compassion. It rewarded order. By the time she was grown she belonged to a world that denied her origin. She was property in the eyes of the law. Her past existed only in memory, and memory had no legal weight. The same structures that guarded her brother's power ensured she remained invisible. One sibling stood at the center of authority. The other lived in its shadow, shaped by a childhood stolen and sold away. It began when she was still a child, too young to understand the meaning of loss or the weight of decisions made over her life. One day the world she knew simply disappeared. Familiar voices faded. Warmth turned into distance. She was taken quietly, without ceremony, as if removing an object from a room. There was no explanation given to her. Children were not owed reasons. Hands guided her away, and she learned quickly that questions brought no answers. What she carried with her were fragments. A face, a name spoken once and never again. The memory of belonging that would later feel unreal. She was moved through places that did not care where she came from. Her story was reduced to silence. Documents replaced identity. Her worth was assessed, not her well-being. She was passed along as something transferable, something that could be owned. The sale was not dramatic. It rarely was. There were no cries that mattered to those involved. Transactions happened calmly, efficiently. A child changed hands. Coin exchanged. Records updated. Life continued for everyone else. With each transfer she learned to disappear a little more. To survive she let go of the past piece by piece. Names were forgotten on purpose. Memories were hidden where no one could reach them. Hope became something she could not afford. As years passed she was absorbed into a system designed to erase. Enslavement did not rely only on chains. It relied on repetition, on obedience taught daily, on reminding someone that resistance was pointless. While she was being broken into compliance, her brother was being shaped by privilege. He was educated, protected and prepared for power. The same system that stripped her of freedom reinforced his authority. One life was reduced, the other elevated. Laws ensured that his inheritance remained intact. Customs ensured his dominance went unchallenged. No one connected the loss of a child to the rise of a baron. The separation was convenient. It solved problems for those in control. She was forgotten not because she lacked value, but because remembering her served no purpose. Silence was useful. Absence simplified things. The system did not reward compassion. It rewarded order. By the time she was grown she belonged to a world that denied her origin. She was property in the eyes of the law. Her past existed only in memory, and memory had no legal weight. The same structures that guarded her brother's power ensured she remained invisible. One sibling stood at the center of authority. The other lived in its shadow, shaped by a childhood stolen and sold away. When the truth finally surfaced, the baron's reaction was not written in grand gestures. There were no dramatic shouts or visible collapse. Instead it lingered in subtle shifts, in the pause of a hand, in the narrowing of his eyes. Shock, if it existed, was private and carefully contained. Publicly he maintained composure, because power demanded it. Composure was a shield, a signal that he remained untouchable. Even when confronted with a truth that should have shaken him to the core, denial may have followed closely behind. How could this be possible? A sister, lost so long, torn from him by circumstance, yet still alive and standing before him. Denial is natural for those who have been taught that the world bends to their authority, that consequences belong to others, not to them. It is easier to question the truth than to question oneself, and yet perhaps there was indifference. After all, empathy is a fragile thing when shielded by years of privilege. The Baron had spent a lifetime surrounded by affirmation, where obedience was rewarded and feelings were secondary. Power shapes perception. It teaches that human connections are optional, and that control is paramount. To see a human being as a relative, rather than a possession, requires the dismantling of habits ingrained since childhood. Those habits were not lightly abandoned. In that moment the room held more than silence. It held questions. Did he recognize her as family, as someone who once shared his childhood, his blood, or did the years of distance, the lessons of dominance and entitlement, erase that connection entirely? Did he see her eyes and recall a sister's smile, or did he see only what he had been taught to see: property, to be used, commanded and controlled? Power has a way of numbing the heart. It convinces those who wield it that emotions are weaknesses, that attachments are distractions. It blurs the lines between humanity and ownership. The Baron's life had been a continuous reinforcement of this idea. Loyalty to him was not earned. It was demanded. Fear ensured obedience. Wealth ensured access. Authority ensured silence. Compassion therefore became expendable. Empathy became a choice that over time he may have forgotten existed. His gaze likely measured her as he would measure a commodity, an evaluation of usefulness, obedience and status. Yet beneath the surface, instinct may have stirred. Recognition is not easily erased. Blood remembers even when society forgets. And still the questions remained unspoken. Could he reconcile the sister he had lost with the enslaved woman before him? Could he see beyond ownership to humanity? Could he allow remorse? Or was it a luxury he had never been permitted to feel? In that quiet tension, the tragedy of power became evident. It shapes perception. It isolates the privileged, and it redefines relationships in ways that can render even family invisible. The answer to whether he saw her as kin or commodity was not simple. It existed somewhere in the space between habit, authority, and the faintest trace of what might have once been human connection. Beneath the glittering Christmas lights, there was no laughter that reached her ears, no warmth that touched her heart, only the quiet weight of unspoken suffering. A life stolen, a bond erased, a sister reduced to property, while the world around her celebrated. There was no justice, no recognition, no hope of restitution. The room was filled with light, but for her, it only highlighted the darkness she had endured. This story reminds us that cruelty often hides behind tradition, wealth and power, that silence can be as loud as a scream, and that history holds lessons we cannot afford to ignore. Even in moments meant for joy, human suffering can persist, unseen, unheard, unacknowledged. If this story moved you, opened your eyes, or made you think differently about the hidden truths of power and family, make sure to like this video, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that reveal the unseen, challenge what we take for granted, and shed light on the forgotten corners of history.